The security camera blinked red in the corner of the mahogany-paneled office. Its lens focused on the massive steel safe that stood wide open like a gaping mouth. Inside, stacks of $100 bills sat carelessly beside glittering gold coins and priceless family heirlooms. Any reasonable person would call it madness to leave such wealth exposed. But Grayson Thorne wasn't interested in being reasonable tonight. He was interested in the truth. Grayson adjusted his silk tie and checked his watch. In exactly 30 minutes, his new housekeeper would arrive for her second day of work, bringing along her 7-year-old daughter. The little girl who had shyly hidden behind her mother's legs during yesterday's interview, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit and stealing curious glances around his mansion's grand foyer. The billionaire's weathered hands trembled slightly as he placed one final stack of cash in plain view. 3 years had passed since his wife Isabella's death, and 3 years since he'd discovered the devastating truth about the people he'd trusted most. His previous housekeeper had been stealing from him for months. His business partner had been siphoning funds. Even his late wife's sister had helped herself to Isabella's jewelry collection during the funeral arrangements. Everyone wanted something from Grayson Thorne. Everyone had their price. But this time would be different. This time, he'd know exactly who he was dealing with before he made the mistake of trusting again. The cameras would capture everything. One stolen bill, one missing coin, and Kira Johnson and her daughter would be out on the street before sunset. Grayson walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows and gazed out at his perfectly manicured grounds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rose garden Isabella had loved so much, now maintained by a professional service because he couldn't bear to touch the flowers himself. Everything in his life was maintained by hired hands now. Nothing was personal. Nothing was real. A soft knock echoed through the mansion's halls, followed by the gentle voice he'd heard only once before. "Mr. Thorne? This is Kira Johnson. I'm here for work." He straightened his shoulders and forced his expression into the cold mask he'd perfected over the past 3 years. Time to see what kind of people he'd invited into his home. Time to discover if integrity still existed in this world, or if everyone was just waiting for their opportunity to take what wasn't theirs. Grayson pressed the intercom button. "Come in, Mrs. Johnson. The front door is unlocked." He listened to their footsteps in the marble foyer, one set confident and purposeful, the other small and hesitant. Through his office doorway he caught a glimpse of them. Kira Johnson moved with quiet dignity despite her simple clothing, her natural beauty evident even in the harsh morning light. Her daughter Aaliyah stayed close to her mother's side, her dark eyes wide with wonder as she took in the mansion's grandeur. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," Kira said softly, smoothing down her daughter's hair. "I hope we're not too early." "Right on time," he replied curtly. "Your duties are the same as we discussed yesterday. 3rd floor bedrooms, main kitchen, and this office. You'll find cleaning supplies in the utility room." He gestured vaguely toward the hallway. "I'll be in meetings most of the day. Try not to disturb anything important." Kira nodded, her expression remaining professionally pleasant despite his cold tone. "Of course, sir. Aaliyah will stay with me and won't touch anything. See that she doesn't." Grayson's eyes flicked to the little girl, who was staring up at an oil painting of Isabella. Something twisted in his chest at the innocent wonder on her face, but he pushed the feeling aside. "I have very valuable items throughout this house. I trust that won't be a problem." "No problem at all, Mr. Thorne," Kira assured him. "We understand completely." As they left to begin their work, Grayson returned to his desk and pulled up the security camera feeds on his computer. Multiple screens showed different angles of his office, all focused on that open safe. The test had begun. Hours passed as he attempted to focus on business calls and financial reports, but his attention kept drifting to those screens. He watched Kira work with quiet efficiency, dusting furniture and organizing papers with careful respect for his belongings. She paused often to redirect her daughter's attention, speaking in gentle whispers that the cameras couldn't quite pick up. The little girl Aaliyah was clearly fascinated by everything around her. She touched picture frames with reverent fingers, studied book titles she couldn't yet read, and asked her mother endless questions in hushed tones. But she never reached for anything valuable. Never tried to take anything that wasn't meant for her. By mid-afternoon, Grayson found himself watching them more than working. There was something different about this woman and her daughter. Something that reminded him of a life he'd almost forgotten, a life where people cared more about kindness than money, where a child's laughter meant more than a business deal's success. But memories were dangerous things. Trust was even more dangerous. He forced himself to focus on the computer screens, waiting for the moment when their true nature would reveal itself. When they would prove, like everyone else, that they couldn't resist temptation when it was right in front of them. The safe remained open, its contents glittering in the afternoon light streaming through his office windows. And somewhere in the mansion's quiet halls, a 7-year-old girl was about to make a choice that would change all their lives forever. Kira Johnson moved through the mansion's pristine rooms with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced with worries that had nothing to do with dust or organization. This job was their lifeline, the difference between keeping their tiny apartment and joining the growing number of families living in their cars. She couldn't afford to make even the smallest mistake. "Mommy, look at all these books," Aaliyah whispered, running her small fingers along the leather-bound volumes in Mr. Thorne's study. "Do you think he's read them all?" "Probably, baby," Kira replied softly, checking over her shoulder to make sure they were alone. "Remember what we talked about. We can look with our eyes, but we don't touch anything unless Mommy says it's okay." Aaliyah nodded solemnly. At 7 years old, she understood more about their situation than most children her age should. She'd watched her mother work 3 jobs just to pay rent. She'd seen the stress lines deepen around Kira's eyes after each job interview that led nowhere. She'd learned to be grateful for peanut butter sandwiches and to never ask for things they couldn't afford. The truth was, Kira had been fired from her last 2 positions under circumstances that still made her stomach clench with humiliation. The first family had accused her of stealing expensive cosmetics items she would never use and couldn't afford anyway. The second had claimed she'd broken an antique vase, though Kira had never even been in the room where they found the shards. Both times, it had been her word against wealthy employers who could afford to be careless with accusations. Both times, she'd been dismissed without references, left to explain gaps in her employment history to skeptical interviewers who looked at her with barely concealed judgment. "Mrs. Johnson?" Mr. Thorne's voice echoed from somewhere in the mansion. "I need to step out for a few hours. Continue with your work." "Yes, sir," Kira called back, relief flooding through her. She worked better when she wasn't being watched, when she could focus on doing her best without worrying about every move being scrutinized. The front door closed with a solid thud, and the mansion settled into peaceful quiet. Kira allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply and look around at her surroundings. Despite Mr. Thorne's cold demeanor, she was grateful to be here. The house was beautiful and the work wasn't difficult. If she could just prove herself worthy of keeping this position, maybe their luck was finally changing. "Can I help you clean, Mommy?" Aaliyah asked, tugging gently on Kira's uniform skirt. "You can help by being my good little assistant." Kira smiled, the first genuine smile she'd allowed herself all day. "But remember, this is someone else's home. We treat everything with respect." They worked together in comfortable companionship, Aaliyah chattering quietly about everything she saw while Kira methodically cleaned each room. The mansion was enormous compared to their cramped apartment, but it felt strangely empty despite all its luxury. There were no family photos on the side tables, no children's artwork on the refrigerator, no signs of the warmth that made a house a home. It reminded Kira of the museum she'd taken Aaliyah to visit last month, beautiful, impressive, but somehow lifeless. She found herself wondering about Mr. Thorne's story. What had happened to make such a successful man seem so isolated and guarded? As they moved toward his office for the final cleaning of the day, Aaliyah skipped ahead, her worn sneakers silent on the marble floors. Kira followed, pushing the cleaning cart and mentally reviewing her checklist. Just Mr. Thorne's office left, and then they could go home to their simple dinner and evening routine. But when they reached the office doorway, Kira froze. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The massive safe in the corner stood wide open, revealing stacks of cash, gleaming gold coins, and jewelry that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime. Her heart began to pound as she quickly scanned the room for security cameras, spotting at least 2 red blinking lights immediately. This had to be a test. Or a trap. Or both. "Aaliyah, wait," she whispered urgently, but her daughter had already wandered into the room, drawn by the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Kira's hands shook as she gripped the cleaning cart's handle. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Aaliyah and leave immediately, to not give anyone a reason to accuse them of anything. But she also couldn't afford to leave her work unfinished. If Mr. Thorne came home to find his office uncleaned, he'd have every right to fire her. She was trapped between impossible choices, just like she'd been so many times before. Do the job and risk being accused of theft, or leave it undone and risk being fired for incompetence. "Baby, come stand right here next to Mommy," she said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't go near that big cabinet, okay?" But as Kira watched in growing dread, Aaliyah had already noticed the open safe and was walking toward it with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. The security cameras tracked every movement, recording everything for Mr. Thorne to review later. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine their future. And Kira had never felt more powerless to protect the person she loved most in the world. Aaliyah stood in front of the open safe like she was visiting a treasure chest from one of her fairy tale books. The afternoon light made the gold coins shimmer like magic, and the stacks of money were higher than any she'd ever seen in real life. Her small hands stayed clasped behind her back, just like her mother had taught her when they visited the library and weren't allowed to touch the special displays. "Mommy, why is this open?" she asked in her clear, innocent voice. Kira's heart hammered against her ribs as she quickly dusted the bookshelf near the door, trying to appear busy while keeping one eye on her daughter. "I don't know, baby. Maybe Mr. Thorne forgot to close it. But remember, we don't touch things that don't belong to us. Even if they're pretty? Especially if they're pretty." 3 floors above them, Grayson Thorne sat in his car in the mansion's circular driveway, watching the security camera feeds on his phone. He'd lied about leaving for meetings instead. He'd simply driven around the block and parked where he could observe without being seen. Now his breath caught in his throat as he watched the little girl approach his deliberately opened safe. This was it. The moment of truth he'd been waiting for. On the small screen, Aaliyah tilted her head to one side, studying the contents of the safe with the serious concentration children brought to everything they found interesting. She took a step closer, then another. Grayson's finger hovered over the phone, ready to call security if she reached for anything. But instead of grabbing for the money or gold, Aaliyah did something that made Grayson's world tilt on its axis. She looked over her shoulder at her mother, who was cleaning with obvious nervousness, then back at the safe. Then, with careful deliberation, she reached out and grasped the heavy steel door. Grayson watched in stunned silence as the 7-year-old girl slowly, gently, pushed the safe door closed. The mechanism clicked softly into place, securing all his wealth safely inside. But she wasn't finished. Aaliyah pressed her small hands against the closed safe door and whispered something that the camera's microphone barely picked up. Grayson turned up the volume on his phone, straining to hear her words. "I know we can't have what's not ours," she said softly. "Mommy says we don't touch what's not ours," she whispered to the safe as if confessing to a priest. "She says even when we really, really need something we have to work for it or ask nicely. We don't just take it." Her voice carrying the weight of lessons learned from a mother who was teaching her dignity despite their circumstances. "But if you can hear me, God, or maybe the money fairy or whoever takes care of wishes, do you think I could have a birthday cake this year? Just a little one? Mommy works so hard and I know cake costs too much money, but it's gonna be my birthday next week and I just wondered." She trailed off, then patted the safe door gently. "Thank you for listening. And thank you for letting Mommy have this job. We really need it." In his car, Grayson Thorne, billionaire, businessman, man who thought he'd seen every angle of human nature, sat with tears streaming down his face. His hands shook as he watched Aaliyah skip back to her mother, chattering about how she'd helped keep the pretty things safe. All his life, people had reached for what he had. Employees, business partners, even family members, everyone wanted a piece of his wealth. He'd set up this test expecting to catch them in the act of betrayal, just like everyone else who'd come before. Instead, he'd witnessed something he thought no longer existed in the world: pure, unshakable integrity. A child who closed his safe instead of opening it further. A little girl who whispered birthday wishes to empty air rather than helping herself to the means to buy everything she wanted. And her request, God, it was such a small thing. A birthday cake. Something he could buy without even checking his account balance. Something so simple and innocent that it made his chest ache with emotions he'd buried 3 years ago. Grayson turned off his phone and sat in the gathering dusk, processing what he'd witnessed. This wasn't the ending he'd expected to his test. This wasn't the confirmation of humanity's greed that he'd been bracing himself to receive. This was something else entirely. This was a reminder that goodness still existed, that integrity could be taught and lived even in the face of real hardship. That a mother raising her daughter alone was doing a better job of building character than all his wealth had ever accomplished. As the mansion's lights began to flicker on in the evening gloom, Grayson made a decision that would change all their lives. He wasn't going to fire Kira Johnson and her daughter. He wasn't going to let them slip away into the night like so many other people who'd passed through his life. He was going to do something he hadn't done in 3 years. He was going to open his heart and see what happened. But first he had a birthday cake to order. And a feast to plan. And a new kind of test to design, not one that would reveal their flaws, but one that would let him show them the kindness they'd earned simply by being exactly who they were. The real test, Grayson realized as he started his car, had never been about their integrity at all. It had been about whether he still had enough humanity left to recognize goodness when it stood right in front of him. They hadn't failed his test. They'd passed it in a way that changed everything. Grayson spent the entire night pacing his mansion's empty halls, replaying Aaliyah's whispered birthday wish and the image of her small hands closing his safe. By dawn, he'd made 17 phone calls to bakeries, caterers, florists, and toy stores ordering everything needed for the kind of birthday celebration he suspected the little girl had never experienced. But first he needed to see them again. He needed to look into Kira's eyes and understand how she'd raised such an extraordinary child in circumstances that would have broken most people's spirits. When Kira arrived for her second day of work, Aaliyah once again in tow, Grayson was waiting in the foyer. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his tie askew, his hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night of revelation. "Mr. Thorne?" Kira's voice carried concern. "Are you feeling all right, sir?" He stared at them both for a long moment, this woman who carried herself with quiet dignity despite her worn clothing, and her daughter who sparkled with joy despite having so little. How had he almost missed this? How had he come so close to throwing away the most genuine people he'd encountered in years? "Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "I need to speak with you and Aaliyah. Would you join me in the dining room?" Kira's face went pale. She'd been fired enough times to recognize the tone, the formal setting, the way employers distanced themselves before delivering bad news. Her hand instinctively moved to Aaliyah's shoulder, pulling her daughter closer. "Of course, Mr. Thorne," she replied with as much dignity as she could manage. "Aaliyah, come with Mommy." They followed him through the mansion's corridors to a dining room that could have seated 20 people comfortably. The long mahogany table was set with fine china and crystal glasses, as if he was expecting important guests rather than a housekeeper and her child. "Please sit," Grayson said, gesturing to chairs near the head of the table. Kira perched on the edge of her seat, ready to leave quickly when the inevitable came. Aaliyah swung her legs and looked around the elegant room with wide-eyed wonder, completely unaware of her mother's tension. "Mr. Thorne," Kira began, "if this is about yesterday, I want you to know that neither Aaliyah nor I touched anything in your office. I know the safe was open and I understand how that might look, but—" "Stop," Grayson interrupted gently. "Please. Just stop." He walked to the head of the table but didn't sit, instead gripping the back of his chair as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I left that safe open on purpose," he said. The words hit Kira like a physical blow. Her worst fears confirmed it had been a trap all along. She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar sting of betrayal and humiliation. Another job lost. Another black mark on her reputation. Another month of wondering how they'd make rent. "I've been hurt before," Grayson continued, unaware of the devastation his confession had caused. "By employees. By business partners. By family. I thought everyone had a price. Everyone would take what they could get if the opportunity presented itself. So you tested us," Kira said quietly, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her chest. "I understand, Mr. Thorne. You have every right to protect yourself. We'll gather our things and go." She started to stand, but Grayson's next words stopped her cold. "You don't understand," he said, and now his voice was thick with emotion. "You passed. You both passed in a way that I never expected, never hoped for. Aaliyah didn't take anything from that safe. She closed it. She protected my belongings when she thought no one was watching. And then she asked for a birthday cake." Aaliyah looked up at the mention of her birthday, her face brightening. "You heard me? I wasn't sure if wishes worked that way, but Mommy says it never hurts to ask politely." Grayson's composure finally cracked. 3 years of carefully constructed emotional walls crumbled as he looked at this child who'd found a way to hope for small miracles even in the face of poverty. He sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands. "When is your birthday, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice muffled. "Next Friday," Aaliyah replied cheerfully. "Mommy said we might get a cupcake from the grocery store if she gets paid on time." Kira's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She'd worked so hard to shield Aaliyah from the worst of their financial struggles, but the truth had a way of revealing itself in moments like these. "Mr. Thorne," she said carefully, "I appreciate that we passed your test, but I think it would be best if we found other employment. This kind of arrangement, it's not healthy for any of us." "No," Grayson said, lifting his head to look at her directly. "Please don't go. I know I don't deserve your trust after what I did, but I need to make this right. I need to. God, I don't even know where to start." He pressed a button on the wall, and within moments his household staff began bringing in covered dishes. The aroma of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables filled the room. It was a feast fit for royalty, and it was all for them. "This is my apology," Grayson said as plates were set before them. "For testing you. For doubting you. For almost making the biggest mistake of my life by letting you walk away." Aaliyah gasped at the spread before them. "Is this all for us? Really?" "Really," Grayson confirmed, managing his first genuine smile in years. "And this is just the beginning. Aaliyah, would you like to have your birthday party here? With a real cake and decorations and presents?" The little girl looked at her mother for permission, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. Kira sat frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune and unsure whether to trust this unexpected kindness. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for us?" Grayson looked at both of them, this woman who'd maintained her dignity through hardships he could barely imagine, and her daughter who'd shown him what integrity looked like when no one was watching. "Because," he said simply, "you reminded me what it feels like to believe in goodness again. And that's worth more than anything in my safe." The feast in the mansion's grand dining room became a turning point that none of them could have anticipated. Aaliyah had never seen so much food in one place, and her delighted chatter filled the usually silent space with warmth that Grayson had forgotten was possible. "Mr. Thorne, is it really okay to eat all this?" she asked, carefully cutting her chicken into small pieces just like her mother had taught her. "It's all for you and your mother," he assured her, watching in fascination as she ate with perfect manners despite her obvious hunger. "And please call me Grayson." Kira shot him a warning look. "Aaliyah, Mr. Thorne is being very kind, but we still need to be respectful." "It's all right," Grayson said gently. "I'd like us to be friends if that's possible." As they ate, he found himself asking questions he'd never thought to ask an employee before. About Aaliyah's school, her favorite subjects, her dreams for the future. The little girl responded with enthusiasm, telling him about her love for reading and her hope to become a teacher someday so she could help other children learn. "School is okay," she said thoughtfully, "but sometimes the other kids have things I don't have. Like fancy backpacks and new shoes. But Mommy says what matters is what's in your head and your heart, not what's on your back." Grayson glanced at Kira, who was eating quietly while watching her daughter with obvious pride. "Your mother is very wise." "The wisest," Aaliyah agreed. "She works super hard. Sometimes she's so tired she falls asleep in her work clothes, but she always helps me with my homework first." The conversation continued as they shared dessert, a chocolate cake that made Aaliyah's eyes go wide with joy. Grayson found himself laughing genuinely for the first time since Isabella's death, drawn in by the child's infectious happiness and her mother's gentle strength. When they finally finished eating, Grayson cleared his throat. "I have a proposal for you both," he said. "Kira, I'd like to increase your salary significantly. And Aaliyah, I'd like to help with your education." Kira stiffened. "Mr. Thorne, that's very generous, but we can't accept charity." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "It's an investment. In people who've shown me something I'd forgotten existed: genuine goodness. Aaliyah is clearly bright and deserves every opportunity to succeed. And you?" He paused, studying Kira's face. "You've raised an extraordinary daughter under circumstances that would have defeated most people. That takes strength I admire." "What exactly are you proposing?" Kira asked cautiously. "Private school for Aaliyah. The best education money can buy. Tutoring if she needs it, though I suspect she won't. And for you, a position that's more than just housekeeping. I need someone I can trust to help manage this place, someone with integrity and judgment." Aaliyah bounced in her seat. "Mommy, could I really go to a fancy school? With lots of books and maybe a library?" Kira's eyes filled with tears. "Baby, let Mommy think about this." "What's to think about?" Grayson asked, genuinely puzzled. "I'm offering you both a better life." "Because you feel guilty about your test," Kira replied. "Guilt isn't a foundation for this kind of arrangement, Mr. Thorne. What happens when the guilt fades? When you decide we're not worth your investment anymore?" Her words hit him like cold water. She was right, of course. His initial motivation had been guilt and shame over his deception. But as he looked at them both, Aaliyah's hopeful face and Kira's protective wariness, he realized his feelings had already evolved into something deeper. "You're right to be cautious," he admitted. "I have a history of pushing people away, of not trusting anyone. But watching you both today, sharing this meal with you, it's reminded me of what I've been missing. What I've chosen to live without." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens Isabella had once tended with such love. "My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. And in my grief and anger, I convinced myself that everyone was out to take advantage of me. I built walls so high that I couldn't see the sky anymore. I'm sorry for your loss, Kira said softly. Isabella always said that a house isn't a home without children's laughter in it, Grayson continued. I haven't heard a child laugh in these rooms since she died. Until today. He turned back to face them. I'm not offering this out of guilt anymore. I'm offering it because you've given me something precious, hope that there are still good people in the world. Let me give you something precious in return. Security. Opportunity. A future where Aaliyah can become anything she wants to be. Kira looked at her daughter, who was listening to every word with the seriousness children brought to conversations that might change their lives. What do you think, baby? I think Mr. Grayson seems lonely, Aaliyah said with the devastating honesty of childhood. And maybe if we're his friends he won't be lonely anymore. And maybe I could learn lots of things at the fancy school and come home and teach them to you. Out of the mouths of babes, Grayson murmured. Kira was quiet for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities, dreams and practicalities. Finally, she looked up at Grayson with determination in her eyes. If we do this, she said, it has to be on equal terms. I'm not a charity case and neither is my daughter. We'll earn everything you give us. I wouldn't expect anything less, Grayson replied. And if it doesn't work out, if you change your mind or we don't meet your expectations, you give us notice. Honest notice. No sudden dismissals. Agreed. Kira took a deep breath. Then yes, we accept your offer. With gratitude. Aaliyah clapped her hands together, her joy infectious. Does this mean I can have a birthday party here? With decorations and everything? The biggest birthday party this house has ever seen, Grayson promised, and for the first time in 3 years he was already looking forward to tomorrow. The next few weeks transformed the mansion from a mausoleum of memories into something approaching a real home. Aaliyah's enrollment at Brookshire Academy, the most prestigious private school in the city, had been accomplished with a single phone call and a donation that ensured she'd have every resource she needed to succeed. Watching her get ready for her first day, dressed in the crisp uniform that Grayson had insisted on purchasing, Kira felt a mixture of pride and anxiety that kept her awake most of the night. Do I look okay, Mommy? Aaliyah asked, spinning in front of the mirror in their new quarters, a beautiful suite of rooms on the mansion's second floor that was larger than their entire previous apartment. You look perfect, Kira assured her, straightening the little girl's collar. Remember what we talked about. Be yourself, be kind to everyone, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there. Grayson appeared in the doorway, holding a leather backpack that probably cost more than Kira used to make in a month. Ready for your big day, Aaliyah? I think so, she replied, accepting the backpack with reverence. Are you sure it's okay for me to have something this nice? It's not just okay, it's necessary, Grayson said firmly. You deserve the best, sweetheart. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. As they drove to the school in Grayson's luxury car, Aaliyah pressed her face to the window and peppered him with questions about everything they passed. Her curiosity and intelligence impressed him more each day. Isabella would have loved this child, he thought. She would have seen the same potential he was beginning to recognize. Brookshire Academy was everything Kira had imagined when she dared to dream about better opportunities for her daughter. Manicured grounds, state-of-the-art facilities, and teachers who genuinely seemed to care about each student's success. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Thorne, the principal, Mrs. Harrison, greeted them warmly. We're so excited to have Aaliyah join our school family. Her entrance exam scores were exceptional. Aaliyah beamed at the praise, then tugged on Grayson's sleeve. Will you pick me up today? I want to tell you everything I learn. I wouldn't miss it, he promised, surprised by how much he meant those words. After they left Aaliyah in her new classroom, surrounded by curious but welcoming classmates, Grayson and Kira drove back to the mansion in comfortable silence. The morning had gone better than either of them had dared hope. Thank you, Kira said quietly as they pulled into the circular driveway. You have no idea what this means to us. I'm beginning to understand, Grayson replied. Seeing her face light up when Mrs. Harrison mentioned the library, that was worth everything. Over the following days they settled into new routines that felt surprisingly natural. Kira's expanded role in managing the household came easily to her. She had excellent organizational skills and an eye for detail that impressed the other staff members. More importantly, she brought a warmth to the mansion that had been missing for years. Grayson found himself looking forward to the end of each workday, when Aaliyah would return from school bursting with stories about her classes, her new friends, and everything she'd learned. He'd set up a homework area in his study, and watching her tackle her assignments with fierce concentration reminded him of Isabella's dedication to her own pursuits. Mr. Grayson, Can you help me with this math problem? Aaliyah asked one afternoon, climbing onto the chair beside his desk. Let's take a look, he said, setting aside his business reports to focus on her worksheet. Mathematics had always been one of his strengths, and he found joy in explaining concepts in ways that made her eyes light up with understanding. You're really good at this, she said admiringly. Were you the smartest kid in your class? I worked very hard, he replied diplomatically. Just like you're doing now. Mommy says hard work is more important than being naturally smart. She says you can't control how smart you are, but you can control how hard you try. Your mother is very wise. These daily interactions began to weave themselves into the fabric of Grayson's life in ways he hadn't expected. Aaliyah's innocent questions about his business, her delight in the mansion's library, her careful observations about everything around her, it all served to break down the walls he'd built around his heart. But it was Kira who truly challenged him to examine the man he'd become since Isabella's death. One evening, as they worked together in his study, she organizing his files while Aaliyah did homework, she made an observation that stopped him cold. You have beautiful gardens, she said, looking out the window at the rose beds that were maintained but no longer tended with love. Your wife must have enjoyed them very much. She did, Grayson replied carefully. She spent hours out there every day. Do you ever go out there now? The question was asked without judgment, but it hit him like a punch to the stomach. No. I can't. Kira looked at him with understanding in her eyes. Grief has its own timeline, she said gently. But sometimes we hold on to pain so tightly that we forget to hold on to love. Her words echoed in his mind long after she and Aaliyah had gone to their rooms for the night. 3 years he'd avoided those gardens, afraid that connecting with Isabella's memory would make the loss hurt even more. But watching Aaliyah discover new things every day, seeing Kira embrace each opportunity with gratitude despite her past hardships, they were teaching him that avoiding joy didn't protect him from pain. It just ensured he'd never feel anything at all. The next morning, Grayson found himself standing at the garden's edge before sunrise, breathing in the scent of roses that bloomed whether he acknowledged them or not. For the first time since Isabella's death, he allowed himself to remember not just the loss, but the love they'd shared. They're beautiful, aren't they? Kira's voice came softly from behind him. He turned to find her standing a respectful distance away, clearly hesitant to intrude on his private moment. Isabella planted every one of these bushes herself, he said. She said roses were like love, they required patience, attention, and the willingness to get pricked by thorns occasionally. She sounds like she was special. She was. Grayson was quiet for a moment. She would have loved Aaliyah. And she would have. He trailed off, not ready to voice what he was beginning to realize about his feelings for Kira herself. Would have what? Kira prompted gently. She would have been glad to know that someone brought laughter back to this house, he finished, which was true if not complete. As they stood together in the morning light, surrounded by Isabella's roses and the promise of a new day, Grayson felt something shift inside him. The walls around his heart weren't gone, but they were cracking. And for the first time in 3 years, he was grateful for the fissures that were letting light seep in. 3 weeks into Aaliyah's time at Brookshire Academy, she bounded into Grayson's study with a report card that made her practically glow with pride. Look what I got. Grayson set aside his work to examine the paper she thrust into his hands. Straight A's across every subject, with glowing comments from her teachers about her enthusiasm, kindness to classmates, and natural leadership abilities. This is exceptional, Aaliyah, he said, meaning every word. You should be very proud of yourself. Can we show Mommy? She's going to be so happy. They found Kira in the main kitchen, working with the chef to plan the week's meals, another responsibility she'd taken on with typical efficiency and grace. When she saw Aaliyah's report card, tears immediately filled her eyes. Baby, this is amazing, she whispered, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without Mr. Grayson helping me with homework, Aaliyah said generously. And the library at school is so big, Mommy. They have books about everything. That evening, as they shared dinner in the mansion's smaller dining room, a tradition that had evolved naturally over the past month, Aaliyah regaled them with stories from her day while Kira and Grayson exchanged glances of shared pride and affection. Mrs. Peterson says I might be able to skip ahead in reading, Aaliyah announced between bites of her favorite pasta dish. She says I'm already reading at a 5th grade level. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Kira said, though Grayson caught the flicker of concern in her eyes. Later, after Aaliyah had gone to bed, he found Kira sitting in the garden, something she'd taken to doing when she needed to think. The evening air was cool, and she'd wrapped herself in a soft shawl that made her look almost ethereal in the moonlight. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, making room for him on the garden bench that faced Isabella's prize-winning rose bed. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds and breathing in the sweet scent of flowers. "You're worried about something?" Grayson observed. "Is it Aaliyah's academic progress?" Kira sighed. "It's wonderful that she's doing so well. But sometimes I wonder if we're moving too fast. If all these changes are happening faster than she can process them. She seems to be adapting beautifully." "She is. But she's also 7 years old and she's gone from having almost nothing to having everything. I worry about..." She paused, searching for the right words. "I worry about what happens if this all goes away. How do you explain to a child that the fairy tale is over?" Grayson turned to study her profile in the moonlight. "Is that what you think this is? A fairy tale? Isn't it?" Kira's voice was soft but direct. "A poor single mother and her daughter, rescued by a wealthy man who transforms their lives overnight? It's the stuff of storybooks, Grayson. And storybooks aren't real life." "What if it could be?" he asked quietly. Something in his tone made her look at him directly. "What do you mean?" For a long moment, Grayson struggled with words that felt too important to get wrong. "I mean that you and Aaliyah have given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, joy. A reason to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. We're grateful for everything you've done." "I'm not talking about gratitude," he interrupted gently. "I'm talking about family. About love. About the possibility that sometimes broken people can help heal each other." Kira's breath caught. "Grayson. I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I need you to know that my feelings for you, for Aaliyah, they're not based on guilt or pity or some need to rescue anyone. They're based on the fact that you've reminded me who I used to be before grief made me forget." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and fear in equal measure. "I haven't been completely honest with you," Kira said finally. Grayson felt his heart skip. "About what?" "About why I lost my previous jobs. The families that accused me of stealing, of breaking things, they weren't entirely wrong." "I don't understand." Kira closed her eyes as if the memory was painful to revisit. "I didn't steal money or jewelry. But I did steal something. Food. Small amounts, nothing they would have missed under normal circumstances. Aaliyah was going through a growth spurt and she was always hungry, and there were weeks when I had to choose between rent and groceries." She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. "The expensive cosmetics they accused me of taking? They were samples I picked up from hotel lobbies to give to Aaliyah so she could play dress up like other little girls. The antique vase? I did break it, while I was dusting it with hands that were shaking from exhaustion and worry." Grayson listened without judgment, his heart aching for what she must have endured. "I never took anything significant," Kira continued. "Never anything that would have changed their lives in any way. But I did take things, and when they accused me I couldn't defend myself because they were right. Maybe not about the specifics but about the basic fact that I had crossed lines I swore I never would." "You were trying to feed your daughter," Grayson said simply. "That doesn't make it right." "No," he agreed. "But it makes it human. And it makes me admire your strength even more." Kira stared at him in surprise. "You're not angry? Disappointed?" "I'm heartbroken that you were in that position in the first place," Grayson replied. "And I'm grateful that despite everything you went through, you raised a daughter who closed my safe instead of opening it wider. Who taught you that kind of integrity. Because whoever it was, they did something extraordinary." Tears began to flow down Kira's cheeks. "My grandmother. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident. She used to say that poverty might bend us, but it should never break our souls. She was wise. And she would be proud of the woman you've become." They sat together in the moonlit garden, surrounded by the roses that represented one love story and the possibility of another. When Grayson finally reached over and took Kira's hand in his, she didn't pull away. "I can't promise this will be easy," she said softly. "I've been hurt before. Used before. And I have Aaliyah to think about." "I can't promise it will be easy either," Grayson replied. "I'm still learning how to trust again. Still learning how to let people in. But I know that losing you both would be worse than never trying at all." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to two wounded hearts taking the first tentative steps toward healing. And somewhere in the mansion behind them, a little girl slept peacefully, unaware that her birthday wish was about to come true in ways she could never have imagined. Aaliyah's 8th birthday dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect spring weather that seemed ordered especially for celebration. She woke to find her bedroom decorated with balloons and streamers, and her excited squeals of delight echoed through the mansion's halls. "Mommy? Mr. Grayson. Come see." "Come see," she called, bouncing on her bed in her favorite pajamas. Kira appeared first, followed closely by Grayson, both of them grinning at her infectious joy. Over the past week, they'd worked together to plan every detail of the celebration, from the decorations to the guest list that included her new classmates from Brookshire Academy. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Kira said, sitting on the edge of the bed to hug her daughter. "Are you ready for your special day? Is the cake really as big as you said?" Aaliyah asked, looking between them with wide eyes. "Bigger," Grayson promised. "But you'll have to wait until the party to see it." The morning was filled with present opening, each gift carefully chosen to delight and educate. Books, art supplies, science kits, and a beautiful dollhouse that made Aaliyah gasp with wonder. But the gift that moved her to tears was a photo album filled with pictures of the past month, her first day at school, homework sessions with Grayson, cooking lessons with Kira, quiet moments in the garden. "We're a family in these pictures," she said softly, tracing the images with her finger. The words hung in the air, loaded with hope and meaning that made both adults exchange glances over her head. By afternoon, the mansion had been transformed into a wonderland. The ballroom, unused since Isabella's time, sparkled with decorations in Aaliyah's favorite colors. Tables groaned under the weight of party foods, games were set up throughout the space, and in the center of it all stood a three-tiered princess cake that looked like something from a fairy tale. When Aaliyah's classmates began arriving with their parents, Kira felt a moment of anxiety. These were wealthy families who moved in circles she'd never accessed before. Would they accept her and Aaliyah? Would they see through the beautiful clothes and elegant surroundings to the truth of their humble origins? But her fears proved groundless. The children were simply excited to celebrate with their new friend, and the parents, perhaps influenced by Grayson's presence and obvious devotion to Aaliyah, welcomed Kira warmly. "Aaliyah is such a joy to have in class," Mrs. Peterson, her teacher, told Kira. "She's not only academically gifted but has such a kind heart." The other children gravitate toward her naturally. As the party progressed, Grayson found himself watching Kira as much as he watched Aaliyah. The way she moved through the crowd, making sure every child felt included, helping shy kids join games, complimenting parents with genuine warmth, she had a natural grace that had nothing to do with wealth or status and everything to do with character. "She's something special, isn't she?" Grayson turned to find Robert Chin, the father of one of Aaliyah's classmates, standing beside him with a knowing smile. "Yes, she is," Grayson replied without hesitation. "My wife was wondering, are you and Kira together? Officially, I mean." The question caught Grayson off guard. Were they together? They shared meals, raised Aaliyah collaboratively, spent evenings talking about everything and nothing. They'd held hands in the garden and shared moments of connection that felt deeper than friendship. But they hadn't defined what they were to each other. "It's complicated," he said finally. "The best relationships usually are," Robert replied with a grin. "But for what it's worth, you both look at each other like you found something worth keeping." When it came time for the birthday cake, Aaliyah stood on a chair so everyone could see her make her wish. She closed her eyes tight, took a deep breath, and blew out all 8 candles in one mighty puff. The room erupted in cheers and applause. "What did you wish for?" one of her friends called out. Aaliyah looked around the room at her new friends, at the beautiful decorations, at Kira and Grayson standing together with expressions of love and pride, and smiled with the wisdom of a child who'd learned to appreciate miracles. "It already came true," she said simply. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, the three of them sat in the ballroom surrounded by the happy debris of celebration. Aaliyah was exhausted but glowing, her lap full of birthday cards and small gifts from her friends. "This was the best birthday ever," she announced, leaning against Grayson's side while holding her mother's hand. "Thank you for making it so special." "You deserve every bit of it," Grayson said, smoothing her hair. "And many more just like it." "Will there be many more?" Aaliyah asked with the directness of childhood. "Will we get to stay here with you forever?" The question hung in the air, as loaded with hope and fear as any proposal. Kira felt her heart race as she waited for Grayson's response. "Would you like that?" he asked carefully. "More than anything," Aaliyah replied without hesitation. "I love living here. I love my new school. I love having you help with my homework. And I love how happy Mommy is now." "How happy Mommy is?" Kira repeated, surprised. "You smile all the time now," Aaliyah explained. "Real smiles, not the pretend ones you used to make when you thought I wasn't looking." And you laugh at Mr. Grayson's jokes even when they're not very funny. Despite himself, Grayson laughed. My jokes are excellent, thank you very much. See? Aaliyah giggled. Mommy's laughing right now. As they cleaned up together and got Aaliyah ready for bed, the question she'd posed lingered in the air between the adults. When they finally tucked her in, surrounded by her new birthday treasures, she looked up at them with sleepy contentment. I know I already made my birthday wish, she said softly, but can I make one more? Of course, sweetheart, Kira replied. I wish that you and Mr. Grayson would get married, so we could really be a family forever. The words hung in the air as Aaliyah's eyes fluttered closed, leaving two adults staring at each other across her bed with hearts full of possibility and fear in equal measure. Outside, the spring evening settled around the mansion like a soft embrace, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and the hope that some birthday wishes were destined to come true. The week following Aaliyah's birthday party passed in a strange, charged atmosphere. Her innocent wish had brought to the surface feelings that Kira and Grayson had been dancing around for weeks, but neither seemed willing to be the first to address what was happening between them. They continued their daily routines: breakfast together, Aaliyah off to school, collaborative work around the mansion, homework help in the evenings, dinner as a family unit that felt more real every day. But underneath the familiar patterns, tension hummed like electricity before a storm. It was Grayson who finally broke first. On Friday evening, after Aaliyah had gone to bed, he found Kira in the library, curled in a window seat with a book she wasn't really reading. The sight of her there, in what had once been Isabella's favorite reading spot, should have felt like a betrayal of his late wife's memory. Instead, it felt like a benediction. Kira, he said softly, and something in his tone made her look up immediately. Is everything all right? No, he replied honestly. Nothing has been all right since Aaliyah made her birthday wish, because I can't stop thinking about it. About what it would mean. About whether it's even possible. Kira closed her book and set it aside, giving him her full attention. What are you thinking about, specifically? Grayson moved closer, his hands clasped behind his back like he was delivering a business presentation instead of opening his heart. I'm thinking about the fact that I love you. Both of you. Not because you need rescuing, not because I need to feel useful, but because you've become essential to my happiness in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. The words hung between them, bold and vulnerable and terrifying. I'm thinking about the fact that Isabella has been gone for 3 years, and for the first time since her death, I can imagine a future that includes joy instead of just survival. I can imagine waking up grateful for the day ahead instead of just enduring it. He paused, struggling with emotions that felt too big for words. And I'm thinking about the fact that none of this matters if you don't feel the same way. If you see this as just a job, a convenient arrangement, a temporary stop before you move on to something better. Kira stood slowly, moving toward him with careful deliberation. When she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. Do you want to know what I think about at night when I can't sleep? She asked. I think about how you look when you're helping Aaliyah with her homework, so patient and gentle. I think about how you listen when she tells you about her day, like every word is important. I think about the way you've made us feel safe for the first time in years. She reached out and took his hands in hers. I think about how you still love your wife and how that doesn't make me jealous, it makes me admire you more. Because a man who can love that deeply, that permanently, is a man worth loving in return. Grayson's breath caught. Kira? I love you too, she said simply. I've been trying to protect myself and Aaliyah from the possibility of another disappointment. But love doesn't ask permission, does it? It just happens. What about the practical concerns? Grayson asked. The difference in our backgrounds, our circumstances? People will talk. Let them talk, Kira replied with fierce determination. I've spent too much of my life worrying about what other people think. My daughter is thriving, I'm happier than I've been in years, and I'm in love with a good man who loves us both. That's all that matters. Grayson cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his palms. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. I won't be able to pretend this is just an arrangement anymore. I'm sure, Kira whispered. Are you? Instead of answering with words, Grayson leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the moment might shatter if they moved too quickly. But when Kira responded, when her arms came up around his neck and she kissed him back with equal feeling, the world shifted on its axis. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. I want to do this right, Grayson said against her forehead. I want to court you properly, ask your permission to marry you, give Aaliyah the father she deserves. I want to build something real with you, something that lasts. I want that too, Kira replied. But I need you to understand something. Aaliyah and I were a package deal. If you marry me, you're not just getting a wife, you're getting a daughter who will need you to be her father in every way that matters. I know, Grayson said solemnly. And I want that responsibility. I want to walk her down the aisle someday, to help her with college applications, to worry about her first boyfriend. I want all of it. Tears spilled down Kira's cheeks. She's going to be so happy. When do we tell her? Tomorrow, Kira decided. Let's tell her tomorrow, and then we can start planning our future together. They held each other in the library's soft lamplight, surrounded by books and possibilities and the quiet promise of love that had been worth waiting for. Outside, the night was peaceful, and somewhere in the mansion above them, a little girl slept soundly, unaware that her birthday wish was about to come true in the most beautiful way possible. For the first time in 3 years, Grayson Thorne went to sleep thinking about the future instead of the past. And for the first time in Aaliyah's young life, Kira Johnson went to sleep knowing that tomorrow would be better than today, and the day after that would be better still. Love, when it finally arrived, had been worth every moment of waiting. 6 months later, the mansion's gardens bloomed with the kind of radiant beauty that seemed designed for celebration. Isabella's roses had been joined by new plantings that Kira and Aaliyah had chosen together: sunflowers for joy, lavender for peace, and daisies because Aaliyah thought they looked like happiness made into flowers. The wedding ceremony was small and intimate, held in the very garden where Grayson had first begun to heal from his grief. Aaliyah served as flower girl, practically glowing in her pale yellow dress as she scattered rose petals with ceremonial seriousness. "Do you, Grayson Michael Thorne, take Kira Marie Johnson to be your wife?" the minister asked. "I do," Grayson replied, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "With all my heart." "And do you, Kira Marie Johnson, take Grayson Michael Thorne to be your husband?" "I do," Kira whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Always." The small gathering of guests, Aaliyah's classmates and their families, Grayson's business associates who'd become friends, and the household staff who'd watched this love story unfold, erupted in applause as they kissed. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, during the reception, when Grayson knelt down to Aaliyah's level and presented her with a special gift: official adoption papers that would make her legally his daughter. "Aaliyah Marie Johnson Thorne," he said formally, "would you like to be my daughter forever?" "Really forever?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "Really forever. Through homework and bedtime stories, through scraped knees and high school graduation, through everything life brings our way." "Yes," she squealed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, yes." The paperwork had been completed weeks earlier, but this moment, this public declaration of love and commitment, was what mattered. Aaliyah was no longer just the child who'd wandered into his life by chance. She was his daughter, chosen and claimed and beloved. As the celebration continued around them, Grayson found himself standing with his new wife and daughter, watching their guests enjoy the feast that had been prepared with love and gratitude. The mansion's ballroom, once silent and cold, now rang with laughter and conversation. "Any regrets?" Kira asked softly, slipping her hand into his. "Only one," Grayson replied, making her heart skip until he continued. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that the best things in life aren't things at all." "Daddy?" Aaliyah tugged on his sleeve, still testing out the new title with obvious delight. "Yes, sweetheart. Can we get a dog now? Since we're a real family and everything?" Grayson and Kira exchanged glances over her head, both of them laughing at the immediate assumption that marriage meant expanded pet privileges. "We'll talk about it," Kira promised. "That means yes," Aaliyah announced confidently to anyone within hearing distance. Grown-ups always say "we'll talk about it" when they mean yes but don't want to admit it yet. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Aaliyah had finally been convinced to go to bed despite her excitement, Grayson and Kira walked through their gardens hand in hand. The evening air was sweet with the scent of flowers, and the mansion glowed warmly behind them, every window lit with the kind of light that comes from a house that's truly lived in. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Kira admitted. "That this is all too good to be true." "It's real," Grayson assured her, stopping to pull her into his arms. "We're real. This family we've built together, it's the most real thing in my life." "I love you, Mr. Thorne," she said formally, echoing the words she'd spoken in their wedding vows. "I love you too, Mrs. Thorne," he replied, marveling at how right the name sounded. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had witnessed Isabella's love for these gardens, that had seen Grayson's long nights of grief, that had watched a little girl close a safe and whisper birthday wishes to the darkness. The same stars that now blessed a new beginning, a second chance at love, and a family that had been built not from blood or obligation, but from choice and trust and the radical decision to believe in goodness even when the world seemed determined to prove it didn't exist. In the mansion behind them, photo albums held new memories: a wedding day, family dinners, school plays, and quiet moments that had transformed a house into a home. And in the years to come, those albums would fill with more pictures. Aaliyah's graduation from Brookshire Academy, her acceptance to Princeton University with a full scholarship, her wedding day with Grayson walking her down the aisle as a father should. They would document Christmas mornings and summer vacations, the arrival of rescue dogs, 3 of them because Aaliyah had been very persuasive, and eventually grandchildren who would run through the same gardens and listen to the story of how their grandmother had once been so poor she couldn't afford a birthday cake, and how their grandfather had learned to love again by watching a little girl choose integrity over opportunity. But all of that was still to come. Tonight there was just this: a man, a woman, and the child who'd brought them together, standing in a garden full of flowers and possibilities, grateful for the test that had revealed not their weakness but their strength. The safe that had started it all still stood in Grayson's office, but it was no longer a symbol of distrust and protection. Now it held their most precious documents: adoption papers, marriage certificates, and Aaliyah's report cards that chronicled not just academic achievement, but the flowering of a spirit that had been nurtured by love. And sometimes, late at night when the mansion was quiet, Grayson would find himself standing before that safe, remembering the day a 7-year-old girl had closed it gently and whispered a birthday wish that had changed all their lives forever. Some tests, he'd learned, weren't designed to reveal failure. Some tests were designed to reveal miracles. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this heartwarming journey. This story celebrates the power of integrity, second chances, and the beautiful ways love can heal even the deepest wounds. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What was your favorite moment between Grayson, Kira, and Aaliyah? Have you ever experienced a moment where someone's kindness completely changed your perspective on life? What do you think made Aaliyah choose to close the safe instead of taking anything from it? How do you think this family will continue to grow and thrive in the years ahead? Your thoughts and experiences make this community special, so please share your reflections and let us know which part of their love story touched your heart the most.